Alright, here we're going to change pressed in sealed wheel bearing assembly. So first step, in this particular case, you could use an OTC hub tamer or something to change it on the car, but this is as if you got the whole knuckle and wheel bearing assembly off. So we pulled the knuckle from the car. We're going to set it down here. There's a couple things we got to do on the back side. There's this little metal shield, and I'm just going to really carefully pull that out. Bam, get rid of that. Now if you look down in here, you'll notice we've got a snap ring, and so get my trusty snap ring pliers. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the snap ring. Easier said than done sometimes when you have two hands. That's what it is. It loosened up on me. So let's retry that. What you need? Tell me what you want. I can multitask. Yeah, you could talk. Quiet down. No, go ahead.
For axle hub nut?
Jordan and Dylan have it. And they have the unstaking punch too. So at this point, we've got the snap ring pulled. And then we really need to get this hub out. So basically, the hub is pressed into the bearing. So I want to highlight a couple things here. So I'm going to use a makeshift pointer, which is going to happen to be the blade of a knife. This part right here on the very inside, that's the hub. The hub is pressed into the inner race of the bearing. So this is the inner race. So from there, this is actually just a seal and part of the bearing. And then on the very outside, just this part right there, that is the outer race. So kind of as I talk about those things, we have to support some parts and press against some others. So just remember, outer race, the bearing or sometimes the rolling elements, the inner race, and then the hub. So for right now, this bearing is bad. It's not practical to press a bearing out and press a bearing in. You're going to ruin it. And so now understanding that, we are going to press this bearing out. It is absolutely going to damage it unquestionably, but that's okay because you'd be pressing a new bearing in. So the way we press this hub out right here is not really that good for the bearing, but we're going to ruin it. That's just the way it's going to be. So we're going to, at this point, lift it up and we're going to do a setup on the press. So what we need to basically do is, you can see we're going to set it there, we're going to line it up, we're going to have to find several things to do this job. One, we can't press the hub out if the hub is hitting these plates. So we need to basically put a big old bearing splitter under there and kind of run it down so it's going to support the knuckle, the whole knuckle, and allow the hub room to drop out. So we're going to set that up right now. I'm going to make some edits. Right now I'm going to spread these pretty far out. This we'll use later. And I'm going to set the bearing splitter up. Now one way is like this. And it's not a terrible way because this is a pretty big one, but you could see the press could potentially bow these bolts. So it's actually going to be a little better if we support it like that. That way the plates are really what's being stressed. It's better to have the plates going from plate to plate, and that's going to have it be stronger. So
We took it out already.
put it back on.
Okay, but we park it
On the alignment rack. Or on the ground if you can fit under, it's fine.
Okay.
So at this point, what we need to do, we need to kind of slip the hub in there. So I'm going to just make some adjustments right now. We need to open them up a little bit. Gotta go a little bit more. So a lot of this is just a lot of setup time. But you take your time because if you do this job wrong, it'll kill you. And then you'll be dead. So We won't have to say any more about that, but it is true, so you know what you're working with. Got a little bit more. We're very close now. Very close, very close, very close. So we're basically loosening the nuts so that these plates can slide further apart. Now, at this point, it's just dropped in. So kind of what that looks like, I'm gonna pick it up. There's no reason to pick it up, but I'm gonna do it just so you can see. It's heavy, but it looks kind of like that. It's gonna support the knuckle, but allow that hub with the studs in it to pass through. I would hold it for longer, but it is heavy. So we've already done a lot of work today. So basically, I got that set up. I'm just kind of looking, making sure my setup looks good. I'm making sure that my hub, if you look straight under here, I'm gonna make sure that my hub is clear and that my hub is not gonna catch these plates. Because if the hub catches those plates, it's obviously not gonna come out. We need to push the hub out. We're gonna catch the hub in this little box with a bunch of shop rags in it. So the next step, once we've got that thing pretty well set and it looks fairly centered, is we need to get something that is going to sit only on the hub. So remembering, we just need to sit right on the center part of the hub. A lot of times you have all kinds of different drivers and different things. We've got this and we've got bunches of stuff there with the press. The one that we're going to use was, I think we used maybe this one. I think we had a bigger one. We did rehearse it once. So let me find that, pause that. So we're gonna use this piece. Now this piece is gonna just sit on the hub alone. Now the problem with doing this right now is there's nothing supporting the inner race. And the hub is pressed to the inner race. So when we press on the hub and we don't support the inner race, it's probably going to move the whole bearing and it can mess up the ball bearings or the rolling elements. So just a disclaimer, if you're trying to not ruin your bearing, this is not what you want to do. But because most of the time we're going to just go ahead and change the bearing, that's exactly what we're going to do. Now this press might be unique, but let's check it out. This knob right here is turning the press on, so it's going to pump, or this is relieving it. So when I turn it to off, note that this moves. I turn it to off, that goes up. Bam. This other one is a low pressure, high volume valve. So on this one, what's pretty cool is if we turn that to off and I go ahead and pump it, it's going to pump really quickly. It moves fast. Whereas if I turn it on, actually it's backwards. If I turn it off, it pumps slow with a lot of force. If I turn it on, it pumps really fast, but it doesn't assist as much. Now, because you can see we have such a distance to go, we have a couple of options. The best option is actually to go ahead and lift the whole table up. So I could start to tension it with this cable, pull the pins, lift the whole table up so it's closer. The not so good option is going to be to make kind of a setup that will get it to be a little bit closer. But in this case, I'm going to do that. Now this has seen better days, but in the interest of saving time, I'm going to go ahead and actually do that. I'm going to turn it on. Low pressure is going to be on. And it's just going to be high volume, low pressure. We're going to bring it down till it's just about a touch. And then we're going to confirm that we have it pretty centered. And I'm just going to give it one more look over, make sure everything's sitting where I want it. And on the bottom, everything looks pretty good. I'm just going to snug the nuts up right where I have them now. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to keep it on low pressure, high volume. And I realized I'm not quite centered, so I'm going to do another minor adjustment to right there. Okay, that looks good. Now note, you could see that it kind of sat, so let's go ahead and we'll switch spots. So as it kind of sat, and you can see I'm pumping with this arm, as I'm pumping, I could feel it was easy, but it just got kind of hard. So I'm going to turn the low pressure off, which is going to mean high pressure, but the pumps get really easy, but it doesn't move as much. Now note, you can see some movement there, but the key is, look at the gauge. The gauge is indicating tons. So right now it's at 0 tons. If it reaches 10, that means it's applying 10 tons of force. That's a lot. There's hopefully no reason you should have to go that high. So as long as I'm pumping, I feel good. No pressure is building, which keeps your butt out of trouble. As I'm pumping, you can notice it is moving the hub, and it's pressing it out, which is good. So I'm going to pump and pump and pump. Maybe if I get impatient, I'll turn the low pressure back on. It'll make pumping harder, but it's a lot faster. So there we go. Our hub popped. Here's our hub. Now notice a very typical thing happened. This is the inner race with the grease on it. Because we had no real way to support this inner race, or not a very good way to support this inner race, the race just stayed with the hub and pulled off of the bearing. At that point, we probably damaged some ball bearings under there, and it's not really good, but like I said, we're changing it. We need to get this off. I'm not going to do that today because I'm mostly showing how to use the press. There's a couple ways we can do this. One would be we could get a bearing splitter like that big one and try to run the bearing splitter in and catch the edge and press it off, and it works pretty well. Another option is we go ahead and we put an angle cut. You cut almost all the way through, you bang it with a chisel, and then it'll release, and then you can pull it straight off. But there is some risk that comes with that. And the risk is that a piece of metal flies off and sticks into your hand, and then you get something to show for it and something to tell stories about and brag it. So we're not going to do that. Basically, we're just going to take this hub and keep it as is. So I'm going to pull this whole assembly off, and it's right now just kind of stuck on the bearing splitter. So loosen the bearing splitter back up, which we should pretty much be done with by now. And so I'm going to try to take it out. Now you can see the press tool we had was kind of stuck in there, and that's okay. So we took that out, and I'm going to set it. I think I actually may use it again. So set it here. So, bam, there's our assembly. Now we got a couple things here. We took the snap ring off of this side. That's a really good indication that the bearing has to come out this way. We have to lose all the ball bearings out of this bearing right here. This is where that inner race would be. So the hub was right here, and that was rolling on ball bearings, which they left, they're gone. That came apart. So if you're looking at that, what we really need to do is we now need to press this bearing out. If we press right here, that's the other inner race. This is a twin row ball bearing. The first set of ball bearings are gone from pressing it out. The second row are still in there. So if I turn this, that's the inner race. We could push on that part, and by all means, feel free to. All it's going to do is spit out the backside, and even more ball bearings will fall out. What we really need to do is try to press the outer race, because the outer race is what's pressed into the knuckle. So we're going to support the knuckle, and we're going to at least attempt to catch that outer race and to drive it out. So at this point, you need to do a little bit of figuring on what you're going to use. I happen to have an old bearing race, and it drops right in there. So I'm cheating by using an old bearing race that's going to just barely catch the outer race that's in there, and it's going to allow me to press. The next thing is, because we need to press downward, we need to have a way to support this knuckle. And you can see this knuckle is nowhere near flat. So what we've gone and done is taken this sleeve, and there's probably a special service tool, but we did a little custom grind on it and everything, and we basically made it so that this sleeve will sit on there just right. Just like that. You see it's raised up here to clear the wheel speed sensor and to clear the beginning of this upper part of the knuckle, and then this other part of the knuckle. They're both cut out right there. So this flat piece and this whole flat piece is going to support it very well. So that's our setup right there, and if you look straight down through, you'll note that this sleeve is going to perfectly support the knuckle. So when we go over the press, it's going to look like that. We're going to put this on it. We're going to make sure it's sitting on there right. And then we're going to use this old bearing race from a different job. You could use a similar sleeve, a driver, something to press it. That's going to drop in there, at which point we're going to use the press, and this is going to press the bearing, the whole assembly right out, and that's the best way to do it. So if you have to, go ahead and fabricate yourself something up where you could buy a service tool if you have to. I do need to move that bearing, which I forgot. So we'll take that. That thing is still just as heavy as it was. We'll slide these blocks together. We're going to set this up here, and I'm just going to remember that the two cutouts are right there. So I bring the knuckle over. The cutouts that it needs to clear are here and here. I'm just going to slip it in there. Of course it moved on me, unfortunately. So I'll have to make sure I got it right again. Okay, that feels pretty good right there. Okay, the next thing is, you see I don't have enough clearance here. So I'm going to go to the off knob. I'm going to raise that thing up. And there it goes. It's plenty out of the way, I would say now. I'm going to set this driver up. And then at this point, we got a couple options. I mean, one option would be, maybe that one would be good. This one's probably a little bit better. But we obviously can't press against that, so we need to find something that'll fit. That one happened to be perfect. So we'll drop this one in, we'll put this one over the top, and that'll give us a surface to press against.
Flip it around?
Drop it in, drop it on. What'd you say?
We'll flip it around. I don't know.
Oh, maybe, yeah, that actually might be good.
It.
No, that actually looks even better. I like that idea. So on, we're gonna do low pressure, high volume, which moves it fast. And we'll pump, 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 pump. Do a minor movement here. And once we hit that point, this can take a little more force than a hub. So you notice currently I'm going to turn the low pressure off. Now we're at 0 tons. So if you get an angle, so get the gauge and the part on here, maybe from right over there. Can you see the gauge and the part? Easier said than done. Okay, so we want to watch that gauge and watch the part. See, the pressure just jumped up right there. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. That just means this press is making a force against it, which means something in the part isn't moving. And that's okay. We may need to go 5, 6, maybe even 7 tons. But the higher you get in tons, the more force there is, the more violent an explosion is going to be if you've made a mistake. So we're just going to be very cautious. Now I'm going to press a little bit more. And there you go. You heard the bang, and then the tons dropped. The bang was the bearing race starting to move. The bang was a good thing. That was, the bearing race is, the outer race is pressed into the hub, and once it moved, bang, it moved. It dropped the force on the press, so that's good. So we'll do that same thing again. It builds some pressure, and then bang. So once it does that a few times, it starts to get easier. If you start to spike up and build pressure, I recommend releasing it, looking again. Maybe what's happened is your bearing has caught your custom setup on the bottom. I mean, you can't press one part through another. It'll just get higher and higher in tons and then explode and you lose body parts or whatever. So not recommended. Now, because I'm sometimes known to be a little impatient, I'm going to turn the low pressure back on and really knock this thing out. And there that goes. So I'll release it. I'm going to bring it up. About right there. I can then bring our whole assembly right here. Let's break it down and see what we got. Knuckle, take it off, flip it. No bearing in the knuckle anymore. Here's our custom lower setup. Here's what we pressed. This was our press race and our cap. So here's that bearing, right? This part of the bearing got blown up when we pushed the hub out. This part still reasonably good. But at this time, you get your new bearing, maybe a good idea, grease it up. You want to be tricky, go ahead and leave this thing out in the hot sun, take your bearing and put it in the freezer for several hours. Logically, with heat, this would expand. With cold, this would contract, and that may make your press setup easier. Me personally, I get a little bit of grease on my hands, and I just like to use just the minimal amount of grease that's on my hand. I don't really grease it a lot. I don't use WD-40 or anything like that. But this would be where your new bearing comes in. In this case, we're not doing a new bearing. We're demonstrating how to use the press. So I'm going to pretend this is a new bearing. So bam, there's our new bearing. And at this point, just like the last time, we have to press this in. The beauty, pressing it in is easy. The beauty of that is that, look, you got a nice perfect flat surface here on your knuckle. So your knuckle, bam, I just lay on the press. Then you got your bearing, and all you really need is something to sit on the outer race. Again, if you press on the inner race or the rolling elements, you're sending the load or the force through the bearing. You're going to ruin the bearing. But if you're pressing on the outer race while supporting the knuckle, no load is being passed through the bearing here. That's how you don't ruin your bearing. That's the only way to do it. There's no real other way. So we happen to have pre-done a little bit of an experiment here. And I believe this was the one that we found that happens to sit just right. If you look, it's just right on the outer race. It's gonna be perfect. It sits right on the outer race. It's not gonna press the rolling elements or the inner race. So this is gonna be our baby right there. We need to get this knuckle over here. Just set it up real basically on there flat. I prefer to split it on 2 blocks. You could use 1 block right here. Maybe that'd be a little bit better, but this is the way I'm gonna do it. I drop the bearing in. I then will take that perfect fitting die or tool that we're going to press with. Now we need to make really sure that that's not larger than the outer race. On this end, it's slightly larger than the outer race, which means I'm going to start to press it, and then this is going to wedge in the knuckle. So I'm going to use the smaller end, which presses on the outer race, but it's definitely not too big. I'm going to lay it in there. I'm going to try to get it straight, but sometimes it doesn't sit perfectly straight. So I'm going to run it down, switch spots with me, because this one won't have any force quite yet. Now I'm going to run it down. You know, it's probably going to be overextended. So I'm going to, again, I'm recommending that you raise the table, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm going to go with this, and I'm going to build up to meet it. That way I'm saving a little bit of time. Say what you want, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to put it just like this. The reason that it's better to raise the table, if something goes wrong and this flies out and goes through me, it's my fault, and I will suffer whatever consequences there are. So again, it's better to press directly on your part. It does take more time. It's not what I'm going to do. So we're going to bump it down. If you're my student, you do it the right way, the long way. You heard that. Mm-hmm. Okay. You can see it started to press. Now note at this point, let's get an angle where we can see the gauge again. I'm moving it fast, but it's getting too hard, so I'm going to turn the low pressure off. I'm just going to start to pump. You might get a little spike in the needle, but it's still moving, which you can obviously hear it's still moving. And you're going to notice something right here in a second. See, we're still close to 0, maybe 1 ton, 2,000 pounds. Still moving, still moving, still moving. It got almost up to 2 at one point. Almost up to 3. Oh, and you felt it right there. Bam, it's done. No more popping, no more moving. The force instantly started jumping up. That's because we took the bearing and we just seated it. So keep it right on there. I'm gonna release this. So essentially what we just did was that bearing, if you look at it, just went all the way to the bottom of its bore, and it just bottomed out against the back side of the knuckle. Bam! We could tell because it was moving, and then it stopped, and then the tons spiked up on the press. So we know it's there, we're good. You know, some people would say run up to 10 tons to seat it or whatever, and yeah, maybe a good idea, but we just witnessed it. We know it's there. So we can then take this, bring it over here. Now remember, at this point, we would have our hub, which we would have gotten the race off, but because I'm doing this as a demo, I'm going to show you guys how to press the hub back on using a used bearing, which you can't do. I'm telling you can't. The ball bearings are all gone. They're shot. So what we basically need to do is get ready to press that on. So I'm going to flip it so you can see what I'm talking about. that hub, if you look right there, here's our hub, right? See, there's the hub. Here's the whole knuckle with the bearing. That hub right there needs to be pressed into this inner race. If I just start pressing on it, I'm gonna have the bearing push apart. So basically what we need to do when we get to this point, and keep it right there, is we need to come up with a setup that's gonna support the inner race perfectly. Now look right from the top down on that. That is supporting the inner race, but allowing room for the hub to go right in the middle. So this is gonna be our go-to on this tool. So I'm basically gonna take this, I'm gonna flip it, put it here, probably gonna get this up out of the way a little more. Then I'm gonna bring the knuckle over, right, just how we were. I'm going to flip it as well, make sure that nothing's catching it, and make sure, you see right here, the part of the knuckle wants to hit, no problem, I'll just slide the blocks over. And I'm just gonna set it on there. So you have to understand that what we're doing right now is we're getting the inner race to sit on this press block, this tube that we put in here. It's a sleeve. And so now that the inner race is supported on the sleeve, we could take the hub and we're gonna press the hub in, but all the force is between the hub and the inner race. If we were not supporting the inner race, we'd be pushing on the rolling elements, we would ruin it. So we're gonna set that up, we're gonna get it relatively square, and then I'm gonna make a plan for what I'm gonna use, and I'm kinda liking this one right here. So when I get to where I think it's pretty good, I'm gonna go ahead, turn this back on, turn the low pressure on. I'm just gonna get it to move. I'm gonna just get it to, again, I get it to run down till it's about to touch. I just say, let me do a little, I'm just gonna do a little minor adjustment right now. Although, I need to make absolutely sure that our lower sleeve is still clear. And I believe it is, and if it's not, I'll show you what to look for. I'm gonna start to press. Now, boom, you can see it dropping down. Now note, we still have practically no tons on the machine. So if you can get to a point where you can see both, that'd be great. So there it goes, it's moving. I'm getting tired, so I'm gonna turn the high pressure on. I'm gonna pump. Now look, it's already up to 5 tons. It stopped moving, we're there. It went from moving very easy to not wanting to move at all. Now I'm gonna confirm, because what could have happened is our hub could have bottomed out on the inner race, but it doesn't look like it did. It looks good. It's fully seated, it's in there. And you can, at this point, you should turn it pretty easy. This one's missing some bearings, so it's not the easiest. So then, assuming we pressed everything correct, our next step would be, just looking, everything looks good. We'll drop our snap ring back in there. We'll get our snap ring pliers back on it. And what I like to do is just kind of get it so it's started and then just tap it in, because I like to hear the click. Bam, click, click. So I'm looking around. Our snap ring is fully seated. Doesn't look like it's stuck in any spots. And then just the way that we took it apart, we've got this little shield, which needs to be lined up with the wheel speed sensor. Got to line it up perfectly. And we're going to drop that in there. And that's it. It's pressed in. It'll be ready to go back on. Of course, it's not for us because we didn't get a new bearing. We did a used one. Hopefully that made sense. That's it. You guys are good to go.